You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. I never do that. It's a Monster Monday presented by DraftKings. Very fired up for today's guest. You guys are going to love it. I got another one lined up for Wednesday already, which should be awesome. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
So I think you guys are really going to enjoy today's guest. I had a chance to meet him recently. I've admired him from afar for I guess over 10 years now. Gosh, I mean, I was like well out of the NFL when this guy was in high school. So now it makes me feel really ancient that he's like a retired football player, married, children. I guess I'm just that old. It is Christian Hackenberg, former Penn State quarterback, former #1 overall recruit. Obviously got drafted in the second round by the Jets. Christian, really appreciate you coming on the show, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, Ross, I appreciate you having me. It was great time last week getting to catch up and getting to finally meet you. Obviously, big fan of what you've been doing, so I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I've been a big fan of yours for a long time, going back to when, you committed to Penn State and you stayed committed even though there were sanctions against the program. Let's go back to that. I mean, because you were the #1 recruit in the country, you were a 5-star quarterback. I feel like with every passing year, the whole star thing gets even more amplified, and 5-star plus and all these things. I mean, you could have gone basically anywhere you wanted to go, and you stuck with Penn State even after, they had the sanctions levied against them. What was that like? I mean, did you seriously consider going somewhere else at that point?
Yeah, it was nuts, and honestly something that I didn't ask for. I touched on it. I went to Fort Union Military Academy. My dad played quarterback at Virginia, grew up in northeastern PA. My mom played volleyball at Lehigh, I had aunts and uncles and so on and so forth, played collegiately, and my grandparents as well. So I had a great support system, and sports was always a big part of me and my brother's DNA growing up. And for me, all I wanted to do was play college football and play in the NFL one day. I had no inkling of the recruiting world, nothing like that. I grew up in a super small town in central Virginia, so Fork Union just happened to be about 15 minutes down the road. And my dad was he was big on putting us all around the best. If you could put them around great people, it kind of takes care of itself. And naturally, most athletes have with their parents who were athletes, you have kind of that head-butting relationship. So my dad and I, we always got things done, but it was never very easy. So I played for a guy who had coached for 40 years, coached, tons of guys, Eddie George, Chris Perry in high school. I was just another guy. So I vividly remember when I got over there, he laid it out to me. He's like, listen, Christian, if you want to play college football, here's what you have to do. And then secondly, when you go through this whole recruiting process, he's like, you don't got to go to these camps. You don't got to do this. I'm just going to call the coaches. We're going to send you to one-day camps, and we're going to get you exposure that way and let the tape speak for itself. So I was like, great. So we laid out a plan. It was, he made me write it out. It's probably still sitting in my nightstand back home in Virginia. But it was basically, what do you want to get out of school academically? What do you want to get out of school athletically? And what do you want to get out of school socially? And it was so I could compare apples to apples everywhere I went. And for me, having the opportunity to play for Bill O'Brien, honestly, Penn State wasn't even on my radar. Joe and Jay, they didn't recruit me, which was funny. But when Bill got the job, it moved pretty fast. And, really the bowl games and all that stuff, they're fun. But, for me, it was about how do I get to where I ultimately want to get to, and that's the NFL, and using my college experience positively to impact me with that. So that's really how I landed there. You know what I mean? It was tough to not want to go play for a guy who just got done coaching the greatest quarterback of all time. And the system was really tailored towards my skill set and what I wanted to do, taking advantage of my mental aptitude, being able to do things at the line of scrimmage. So that's kind of how it landed. And then obviously all that craziness actually came out right when I landed back home from the Elite 11. So Trent Dilfer and all these guys are they got the word that it was going to be coming, they tried to keep me out there for an extra day or two and go see USC, go see UCLA, go see Stanford. And I was just kind of in that wait and react type of mode, just kind of internalize it. So it was a crazy few months, but ultimately it worked out. I think not as I would have hoped, but it at its core, it was probably the best thing that's ever happened to me.
So interesting because then you go to Penn State and you're the freshman of the year in the conference. I mean,
Yeah.
you're starting the whole season. You've got a really talented receiver in Allen Robinson. You have an amazing year, and people are talking about you as, the type of guy that, could be a big draft pick a couple years later. And then O'Brien leaves. And it's so funny because I recently wrote a column for the 33rd team about how circumstantial NFL careers are. And I think you could probably say the same thing for college. I mean, yeah, I tell people all the time, Christian, I made the team in Washington with the Redskins with Marty Schottenheimer as an undrafted free agent in 2001. There's probably like 20 teams I go to that year as an undrafted rookie that I don't get much of an opportunity. I don't make the team. But they had like all kinds of salary cap issues. And Marty Schottenheimer treated everybody the same. And
Yeah.
the veteran guys did not like that, but he gave everybody a shot. I mean, the next year with Spurrier, those undrafted kids had no chance, right? So, but I was already established at that point. So circumstances mean a lot. And unfortunately for you, you have this awesome year with Bill O'Brien, and then he leaves after 1 year. So, I mean, like, at this point, you're what, 19? And you've gone from number one recruit to the Penn State sanctions to the freshman of the year to your coach leaves. I mean, you got indoctrinated into the business of football, college football, real early.
Yeah, and I always say it, like I was dumb. And like now, exactly what you said is it even bled into my pro career, right? Like I decided to leave due to the circumstances at Penn State early, and I was 20 years old when I declared for the draft. Like I just turned 21 right before I got drafted. So I was really young and I had a lot of maturing left to do. I always thought I was really mature, but that world, as you know, is very cutthroat, very different. And it is circumstantial. And I say this specifically to the quarterback position all the time. I think it's one of the most dependent positions in sports. You could be the most talented guy in the world, but it does take a lot of things around you to go right to be able to develop and ultimately figure out what your strengths are and really hone those skills. And that's something that happens over the course of time. And mine was so quick and so finite. And then there was change, and then there was adjustment, and then there was, just me maturing as a person. So reflecting back on it now, it was very, very fast, very, very fluid, and very, very harsh as it pertains to shifts and changes in those things that you need to develop. And yeah, like it's so weird. It's like a big catch-22, right? It's like there's the football side of it, which has been very well documented, fairly and unfairly. But then there's also like the way that I've tried to take it is just the development as a human being and having such a crazy experience and so much adversity at such a young age and what that ultimately does to you in terms of how you look at life, right? And that's what I think was most powerful about that whole experience. And then to your point, like, growing up in Pennsylvania, like doing it at a place like Penn State is super, super special. And, like I said, it is what it is from that standpoint. But yeah, I mean, Bill was great for me. He did a lot to put me in great situations. He gave me a ton of control. And like I said, like I thought one of my biggest assets was my ability to think critically at the line of scrimmage. He gave me a ton of freedom at the line of scrimmage to get in and out of things. And as Coach Franklin came in, it just kind of there was so much else going on. Like that was at the back burner, right? Like he was much more, he was trying to grow the program in a lot of different ways, whereas Bill was such a football guy. It was like the perfect storm for me when I got in there because it was just like, bury your head in the books, man, and I'm going to give you a ton of opportunity, and you can run with it, and that's all I needed at that point in time.
So funny that you say that because I know both those guys.
Yeah.
And man, like this, a lot of the stuff that Franklin is like elite at, Bill O'Brien hates.
Hate
Like
it.
hates that stuff. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he doesn't want to do that, right? Like Bill O'Brien really wants to be like an offensive coordinator, but he wants to be in charge, right? But he wants to do the football stuff. And not that Franklin doesn't want to do the football stuff. I think Franklin is like an elite leader of an organization. I think in college football, he understands how important all that other peripheral stuff is. Whereas that's the kind of stuff that most of the NFL guys like O'Brien, like they just can't stand at all. It's really funny that you say that. Um, and Christian and I were at an event recently, and I was the MC, and he gave the keynote speech. He said something I thought was interesting. That like starting in your sophomore year, maybe you started to care about other people's expectations of you, or started to think about that. I distinctly remember my father-in-law has a deer preserve out near Penn State, and you guys played. It was before my broadcasting season started. You guys were playing like in Ireland
Yeah.
against UCF, I want to say. And it might have been the first game of your sophomore year. And I'm just there, probably having a beer with my father-in-law, my brother-in-law. We're watching the game. And we're, all grew up Penn State fans or whatever. And you just have a ridiculous game. And you make so many throws. And I think I tweeted Christian during the game, like, your 2015 number one overall pick, Christian Hackenberg. Like I literally was like this guy because you had a good freshman year, and then your first game sophomore year, I'm like, this kid is ridiculous. What was that like for you? I mean, because is that what you mean? Do you mean people like me when you're 19 already projecting you to be the number one pick like the following year? Because I have no idea what that would even be like.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that. I just think it was the fact that at the end of the day, going into that season, right? Like my freshman year, you mentioned Allen Robinson, but there was a host of other guys. I mean, my freshman year, we were playing with like 46 scholarship guys. But we had a very veteran offensive line, guys like Ty Howe, John Urschel, Donovan Smith, who was in his second year, but like we had a very good group of guys to get things done. And that goes back to what I was saying. I was basically just come in, win over the locker room, and then operate, right? But then my sophomore year, it was a big switch, right? We lost a lot of that depth. It was a lot of puppies that we were playing with. And I'm 19 years old. I'm the captain of the team. And I'm like the old head. You know what I mean? So there was kind of that side of it where it was like growing into being the face and being the older guy in a locker room. That's like, I'm like, dude, I'm 19. And then there was just the bigness of that. Like my whole freshman year, Bill did a great job of kind of keeping me. We met 3 or 4 times a week. I was so hyper focused on football that then when Coach Franklin came in, like you said, it was just a complete shift in terms of mentality. I didn't meet with him that much. I didn't do all these things because he was worried about doing other things that he needed to get done in order for the program to be in a place where it needed to be in the college football world. So there was just so much change and so much ebb and flow that like it allowed me then to start realizing like, holy hell, like this is a real thing. Like this is a big deal. And when that started happening, it was less about my development. It was more about trying to bring guys along, and I still had a lot of developing to do. And I couldn't really focus on that because at the end of the day, where I was winning us football games. And the other pieces that we had to continue to grow and develop was where my focus shifted. So my last 2 years in college were really just surviving because although I had areas where I needed to improve, I even had I had conversations with my quarterback coach Ricky Ronnie about this. Like we're not worried about you. Like you can go out and win football games. You can do things. You can operate. We gotta get this whole thing cleaned up. So it was like this perfect storm of a really not great situation to develop in. But that the free time and all that stuff kind of led to me starting to worry about, not worry, but it creeped in like, hey, this guy's projecting this guy's doing this. And I started putting pressure on myself and I started putting pressure on myself to perform. And I started putting pressure on myself to fix problems that I probably shouldn't have been trying to fix, right? It's not my job, but because of the circumstances, I kind of had to think about those things. So it was interesting, man. It was a really that year was a big shift for me. I went into a dark place because I started off high, like you said. I think that's still the Penn State single game passing record, and then did all right for the next 2 or 3 games, but then the middle of that season was just brutal. It was a slugfest back and forth, and then we ended on the high note, finally getting the bowl game back, and had a pretty good performance in New York in the Pinstripe Bowl. So it was a really weird year. And that was probably the fastest maturation process I had to go through.
So speaking of New York, you get drafted after your third year. You mentioned you leave school, you go to the Jets, second round pick, and then you're there for a couple years. You, I think, get traded to the Raiders and then get released there. I'm sure you think about it a lot. I think it'd be unnatural not to. You probably get asked about it, although you probably also have people that are like afraid to ask you
Yeah.
about your career and how you look at your career. Because on the one hand, like, I can look at it and say, dude, you made the NFL.
Yeah.
Like, less than 27,000 people in the history of the NFL, 100 years, have ever suited up for an NFL game. You made the NFL. You were a second round pick. Like, you achieved the goal, right? The flip side is, because of how high you were touted as a recruit, and then your freshman year and all the number one pick and all that stuff, I'm sure, I know you didn't have the pro career that you wanted to have or wish you could have. How do you look back on it now? Like, when someone asks you about your career, how do they ask it to you? I mean, do they say, like, what happened, and how do you respond?
I'm such a low key guy. I really don't try to put myself out into those things. But like, reflecting back on that, it goes back to what I think you said at the beginning. Like, there's so many circumstances that go into it. And when I came out, I still knew that I needed a lot that I needed to get better at. But at the same token, I had all these expectations and this narrative out there of this kid being really, really good. And like, it was just this really kind of battle internally and then externally with like messaging and how things were being portrayed that I had to deal with. And New York was probably the last place I should have gone in terms of the market, the expectations, the way it was. And, my rookie year, we ended up keeping 4 quarterbacks. So there was just not a lot of opportunity for me to develop and grow. No plan, kind of a up and down organization. And it was just one of those things where I think just the timing and where it ended up just wasn't in the cards for me at that position. And then, when I look at it introspectively, I was young. I needed a lot of help and I needed a lot of direction and guidance. And I never sought that out. So that's where my shortcoming was, is I didn't do all those things until it was ultimately too late. I get traded to Oakland. I'm there for 2 weeks during, mini or OTAs, and then there's depth issues there. I get cut, and then I end up signing with Philly, like with 2 weeks left in preseason. And then I go and I have a little stint on practice squad for the next year with Cincinnati. But I started to address those issues then. But at that point, it's the New York market had eaten me alive. I never had the chance to defend myself on the field. And it was just kind of like that perfect storm of messaging and getting eaten up and chewed up. And for me, it sucks because I hate leaving untapped potential on the table. But, again, it goes back to how can I turn that into a positive for me? And I learned a lot, you know what I mean? I learned a lot that's really valuable in the business world. That's really valuable for my brothers who are playing professional sports now too, to be able to help them navigate those waters. But yeah, man, it's not a touchy subject. Like, I'm at peace with it. But it is one of those things where I've had plenty of time to think about it now, and stuff happens, right? There's a lot more people out in the world that are dealing with a lot more real adversity than that. Like, it was a gig. I got the chance to do it. I lived out a dream. Was there stuff on the table? Yes. But like I said, I just have the perspective that there's people out there fighting for their life every day. There's doctors out there that are playing God every day. There's a ton more pressure that goes into that. And I could turn all those experiences into positives and ultimately move and grow from that and learn and be successful in other things.
Yeah, well, and you are, and I'm going to get to that right now. I would just encourage you as much as possible to realize how awesome it is what you accomplished, and that what you accomplished should not be clouded based on what the expectations were when you were 17 years old or whatever, because there's
Yeah.
actually a ton of 16, 17-year-olds that never make it to the NFL. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a ton of five-star guys that never even start in college, never get drafted, never accomplish, what you did. And I'd also say this, there's a reason why certain guys over history have tried to avoid certain organizations, because
Yeah.
certain organizations are where you go to usually not have success.
Yeah.
And we know what some of them are. But you mentioned what you're doing now. I want to make sure we get into that. The last question, because you're doing some really cool stuff that you were telling me about.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I was in corporate America for a few years working for a technology company, and then one of my former teammates came to me with this opportunity to come on board. And essentially, the College Sports Co., which is our parent company, our umbrella company, is an athlete-driven media network, right? And in the confines of college sports now, it's super interesting with NIL and all this other stuff, how important branding is, how important the ability to leverage assets, both, current players and former players. And so what we do is we build athlete-driven content networks at schools, and monetize it. Partnerships, revenue share deals, things of that nature. We have a few properties under management, or properties that we've stood up now. Penn State being probably one of the larger ones. Oklahoma, we're getting really close with a few others in the SEC, and then one of the schools coming over into the Big Ten. So, with that being said, it's been a really fun venture, just figuring it all out. It's storytelling, it's all these things, right? That we just covered, and it's really powerful. So as this whole thing now, the NCAA just released all that stuff that's coming out. The picture's getting much more clear, and the go-to-market strategy is getting really clear as well. So we're really excited with where we're at, but it's been a lot of fun just being able to come back to Penn State for me specifically, and start to build that.
Check him out on social media so you always know everything he's got going on. That is a great business and industry to be in right now. And I think Christian and the guys he's with, like Ben Kunkel, Adam Brenneman, they're the right people at the right time. He's at C Hackenberg1 on Twitter. Christian, really appreciate the time. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Ross, appreciate it, brother.
Christian Hackenberg, a lot of respect for him. Hopefully you guys could tell from that conversation. So interesting to hear about the twists and turns for a guy like that. Big fan of Labatt Blue Light. If you want to take things to the next level, drink some Labatt Blue Lights with your friends and live life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly. I had several Labatt Blue Lights over the weekend, by the way. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York.
Tux Takes.
All right, Ross. The Commanders, they released their kicker, Brandon McManus.
And I'm going to make this big news, came out last night. I'm going to make this the Meaty Monday, Jack, presented by GoodRanchers.com. America's best meat delivered to your door. Use code Ross for 15% off a better way to buy meat at GoodRanchers.com. This is a horrible situation. And I always feel the exact same way about any allegation like this. Either he did it, which is horrendous, or he didn't do it, and these are false allegations, which I would argue with what it does to someone's reputation or whatever in their career is equally horrendous. So as soon as there's any type of sexual assault or sexual harassment allegation, it's awful, really, no matter what the outcome ends up being.
The Dolphins, they signed wide receiver Jalen Waddle to a massive contract extension.
Man, it is good to be a wide receiver. Why couldn't I have been like super fast and athletic and like born 20 years later? It's just unbelievable. Good for Jalen Waddle. But then, of course, there's still those guys, Ayuk and Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb, and it's just not getting any cheaper. Certainly, it's not getting any cheaper for the Cowboys or the Vikings. That much we know for sure. The only other thing, maybe we'll talk about it more on Wednesday, Jack, is the Bears are going to be on Hard Knocks this year. Man, as if the expectations weren't already pretty high for that bunch. Now they're the Hard Knocks team. Wow. Other than that, I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out to myfrontpagestory.com. Guys, it's June. It means it's Father's Day time. Myfrontpagestory.com, best Father's Day gift I'm aware of. BackOfficeScheduler.com, HumanHeadNYC.com, Sporticulture, Pizza Boy Brewing.